Hidden behind the towering red walls of the Forbidden City, a secret world thrived, one that most of China never saw, and even fewer truly understood. This world wasn't just about silk robes, golden halls, and endless luxury. It was a world built on hierarchy, control, and quiet desperation. At the heart of this hidden empire were the women of the imperial harem, concubines, attendants, and empresses who lived, loved, competed, and suffered under a system designed to serve the needs of one man, the emperor. Across dynasties, the organization of the harem varied, but its purpose remained unchanged: to produce heirs who could carry on the royal bloodline and ensure the survival of the dynasty. These women were more than companions. They were political tools, bound by tradition and confined by duty. Every moment of their lives was governed by rules and ranks, from the majestic empress seated at the top to the humble servant girls who occupied the bottom rung of the palace ladder. But how did these women get there? What kind of life awaited them once the palace gates closed behind them? Were there any privileges in this gilded prison, or was it only heartbreak, hidden beneath layers of silk and secrecy? This is the untold story of the women of the Chinese imperial harem, their selection, their struggles, their rituals, and the unspoken price they paid for a life of so-called luxury. Welcome to the shadowed halls of power, where beauty was currency, obedience was survival, and love was a dangerous game. Becoming a concubine wasn't a matter of luck, it was survival of the most flawless. Before a woman could even dream of entering the Forbidden City, she had to endure one of the most brutal and dehumanizing selection processes in history. Every few years, during the Qing Dynasty, the imperial court would scour the nation in search of shunu, a term that literally means beautiful girls. But beauty alone wasn't enough. Candidates were judged on far more than just their looks. They were expected to meet impossible standards, physically, mentally, and behaviorally. It was not a competition, it was an examination of their worth as human offerings. Hundreds of young, unmarried women, many in their early teens, would be gathered before the gate of divine might in the Forbidden City. They came accompanied by clan leaders and family members, dressed in their finest silks, trembling under the weight of expectations. For most, this was the defining moment of their lives. A single glance could decide their fate. However, during the Qing era, not every girl had a chance. Emperor Shunji had restricted the selection to elite families from the Eight Banners system, a privileged Manchu and Mongol military aristocracy. Ordinary Han Chinese women were excluded, making the process not only harsh but deeply political. The first round was superficial: beauty, posture, etiquette. But those who passed were then subjected to intense scrutiny. Their intellect, skills, talents, and even their personalities were tested. It was not unusual for girls to be examined multiple times, prodded by palace officials, evaluated by physicians, and interrogated by eunuchs. Eventually, the few who passed all these trials were brought to the palace of heavenly purity. There, in the presence of the emperor and the empress dowager, the final choices were made. The lucky ones were not celebrated, they were claimed. But this wasn't the start of a fairy tale. It was the beginning of a life bound by rigid rules, silent rivalries, and endless waiting. From that moment forward, these girls no longer belonged to their families or themselves. They belonged to the emperor and to the empire. Inside the Forbidden City, no woman was free. Every step, every glance, every spoken word was dictated by her rank in the harem. The imperial harem wasn't just a collection of beautiful women, it was a meticulously crafted hierarchy, a system that mirrored the structure of the empire itself. At the very top stood one woman, the empress. She wasn't just the emperor's wife, She was a political figure, a manager of the harem, and the embodiment of Confucian virtue. Her authority stretched over the entire inner court. She controlled both the eastern and western palaces, where the other concubines lived. She was responsible for maintaining order, organizing ceremonies, and overseeing daily affairs. Her word was law among the women. Just beneath her were the imperial noble consort, 2 imperial consorts, 4 consorts, and 6 imperial concubines, a carefully numbered and ranked set of women who held considerable influence. Each of these ranks came with privileges, their own palatial residences, a retinue of servants, usually 6 to 8, and access to wealth, power, and most importantly, the emperor's attention. But the pyramid dropped steeply. Below them lived the noble ladies, first-class attendants, and second-class attendants. These women were plentiful and powerless, cramped in smaller quarters, often sharing space and resources. They had few personal luxuries, and even fewer chances to rise. For them, promotion wasn't earned through merit. It was won through survival, cunning, and timing. A single misstep could doom them to decades of obscurity. Yet even in their low rank, these women were under constant watch. Every interaction was political, every gesture strategic. The Forbidden City was a palace, yes, but more than that, it was a cage built on status and silent war. Behind every bowed head and obedient smile, a storm of ambition brewed. In the Forbidden City, even desire was governed by protocol. The emperor's love life wasn't a matter of passion or whim. It was a highly organized ritual, meticulously controlled by court officials and documented down to the last intimate detail. After all, in the eyes of the empire, the emperor's ability to produce heirs was not only a private matter, it was a national duty. Each evening, palace eunuchs would present the emperor with a tray of wooden tablets, each engraved with the name of a concubine. These tablets weren't merely symbols, they were invitations, choices, and commands. The emperor would examine them one by one, knowing that the flip of a single tablet could change a woman's fate. When he finally selected one, it was more than a call, it was an order. The chosen concubine was immediately notified. She would be bathed, perfumed, and stripped of all clothing, wrapped in a thick imperial blanket, like an offering, and carried by eunuchs to the emperor's chambers. This wasn't done for indulgence, it was a security protocol. The concubine had to be entirely nude before entering, to prove she carried no hidden weapons. Even love was not immune to fear. Once inside, her role was clear: to please, to obey, and possibly, to conceive. If she bore a son, her rank could rise. If not, she could be forgotten overnight. This was not romance, it was rotation. It was duty cloaked in intimacy, orchestrated beneath layers of silk and secrecy. For the concubines, every night held a fragile hope and a quiet terror. Would tonight be her turn? Would she rise, or be ignored again? In the emperor's court, affection was scheduled, and love was logged. For most imperial concubines, the days were long and painfully quiet, unless summoned by the emperor or required to attend official ceremonies. These women lived in a strange kind of suspended animation. They were trapped inside a palace of gold, yet starved of purpose. With no family, no freedom, and no certainty, they passed their time in a world that was both beautiful and suffocating. So how did they endure it? In the Qing Dynasty, concubines often turned to art, music, and games to fill the void. Some learned to play traditional instruments, others painted, embroidered, or wrote poetry to escape their reality. Chinese chess, storytelling, and poetry contests were common diversions, though each interaction was laced with unspoken rivalries. Even leisure became a performance. During winter, the palace took on a different mood. Snow blanketed the gardens, and even then, the women would find brief moments of childlike joy, playing in the snow, laughing, building figures, even drawing the emperor into the games. For a fleeting second, they were not concubines, they were girls again. The Forbidden City was also home to hundreds of animals, dogs, cats, birds, all pampered, fed, and cared for by specially appointed attendants. Some concubines found comfort in caring for these creatures, using them as emotional companions in a world where trust was rare. They also strolled the palace gardens, rode on swings, or practiced calligraphy in silence. But underneath it all, they were waiting, always waiting, waiting for the emperor's glance, waiting for promotion, waiting for something to change, and most of the time, nothing did. Behind the glittering walls of the Forbidden City, time moved slowly. Days blurred into months, and months into years. For many concubines, the greatest enemy wasn't another woman, it was boredom, and the crushing loneliness that came with being forgotten. If there was one thing that showcased the surreal contrast between privilege and confinement in the Forbidden City, it was this: the food they ate, and the clothes they wore. Every concubine, from the empress to the lowest attendant, lived under strict standards, but within those rules, status shaped everything, and nowhere was that more visible than in the palace kitchens and wardrobes. The Imperial kitchen was a world of its own, staffed by elite chefs and seasoned nutritionists. It was a culinary powerhouse that sourced ingredients from across the empire and beyond. Exotic spices from Southeast Asia, rare herbs from the mountains, and delicacies from the emperor's hunting grounds all found their way into steaming pots behind palace walls. But how much of this opulence reached the women depended entirely on their rank. While the empress might receive 21 pounds of prime beef in a single day, a second-class attendant might only be granted 5 pounds. The variety, quality, and presentation of meals were all symbolic of status, and everyone noticed. A richly garnished plate was more than just food, it was a sign of favor, power, and proximity to the emperor. And then, there were the garments. The Manchu court was famed for its love of bright colors, ornate embroidery, and layered fabrics. Each woman's outfit wasn't just a statement of beauty, it was a uniform of hierarchy, color-coded and regulated. Concubines were expected to wear specific shades: golden yellow for those of higher rank, champagne, or pale tones for the lesser ones. The emperor and empress were almost always surrounded by a radiant sea of golden silk, no mistake, just royal design. Their closets were filled with names as formal as the robes themselves: Lifu, Jifu, Changfu, Beyondfu. Each garment suited for a different occasion, from grand ceremonies to quiet strolls. Every stitch, every pattern told a story. And yet, none of those stories truly belonged to the women wearing them. They looked regal, they dined like queens, but beneath the silk and spice, they remained prisoners of a golden cage. Beneath the elegant gowns and sweet perfumes, the Forbidden City harbored something far more dangerous than gossip. It was a battlefield, one without swords, but full of scars. While the Imperial harem was designed to symbolize harmony and grace, the truth was far darker. It was a system that forced women to compete ruthlessly for attention, for survival, and for power. A single misstep could mean demotion, disgrace, or exile into a lifetime of obscurity. Promotion was possible, but it was never guaranteed. To rise, a concubine had to catch the emperor's eye, bear his child, or navigate palace politics with careful calculation. Love was secondary, strategy was everything. The higher one rose, the steeper the fall. Even the most powerful were never truly safe. Take the tragic story of Steppe Empress Nara, consort to Emperor Qianlong. In 1765, she made a single mistake, cutting her hair. It may seem minor now, but among the Manchu people, this act was a symbol of mourning, not taken lightly. The emperor saw it as a public insult, a sign of rebellion. His punishment was swift. Her titles were stripped, her attendants dismissed,
and she faded into isolation. Once the highest woman in the land, now barely acknowledged, and she wasn't the only one. Lady Wang, another consort, was demoted when it was discovered she had ordered a brutal beating that led to the death of a palace maid. In 1788, Consort Shen mysteriously lost 2 ranks within just 16 days. The court never explained why. It didn't have to. Every corner of the harem echoed with whispers. Every gift, every gesture, every smile could be laced with betrayal. Jealousy simmered beneath the painted faces, and fear danced behind every carefully measured step. The harem wasn't just a home, it was a game, and the price of losing was your entire identity. To be the emperor's favorite should have meant safety. It should have meant protection, influence, and a life above the rest. But in the Forbidden City, being loved could be the most dangerous thing of all. This is the heartbreaking tale of Consort Shen, the beloved companion of Emperor Guangxu, a woman whose spirit burned too brightly in a world that demanded quiet submission. Consort Shen wasn't like the others. She was curious, outspoken, and endlessly fascinated by the outside world. She embraced Western ideas, new technology, and reform. While most women in the harem tiptoed through their days in silence, Shen questioned, dreamed, and challenged tradition, and the emperor adored her for it. But her boldness made her a threat. At the time, China was crumbling under pressure, foreign powers were closing in, and the once mighty Qing Dynasty was cracking from within. Emperor Guangxu sought reform, and behind many of his progressive ideas stood one woman, Consort Shen. Her influence was no secret, and it enraged the real power behind the throne. Empress Dowager Xe, the emperor's aunt and a force of nature within the court. She viewed Shen not just as a disobedient woman, but as a political risk. Shen defied the rules, she defied Xe, and in the Forbidden City, that could only end one way. In 1900, as the Eight-Nation Alliance invaded Beijing, the Imperial family fled in panic. But Shen was left behind. Some say it was deliberate. Before fleeing, it is rumored that Empress Dowager Xe gave a chilling order to her eunuchs: throw her into the well. They obeyed. Consort Shen, once the emperor's brightest star, was drowned in darkness. Her lifeless body was retrieved later, and the well she was thrown into still exists in the Forbidden City today. Tourists walk past it, unaware of the voice that once echoed through those halls, a voice that dared to speak too loudly. In the end, her tragedy wasn't just her death. It was how easily the palace erased her. To the outside world, life inside the Forbidden City looked like a dream. Silk robes, jeweled hairpins, golden palaces, and exquisite banquets. But behind those locked doors, many women lived not as queens, but as ghosts. They had no freedom, no voice, and often no love. The promise of the imperial harem lured many with fantasies of power and beauty. But what it offered in luxury, it stole in autonomy. Every concubine entered believing she might be the one to rise, maybe even to bear the emperor's heir and change her family's fate. But most faded into the shadows, forgotten by the very man they were trained to worship. Did anyone warn them? Did their mothers cry when the palace gates swallowed them whole? Did anyone tell them that behind every lavish feast was a silent hunger for affection? That behind every golden robe was a trembling heart, afraid of falling from favor? Some succeeded, most simply endured. In the end, perhaps the greatest cruelty wasn't the jealousy, the punishments, or even the loneliness. It was the isolation, living in a palace filled with people, yet feeling completely alone. As the Tang Dynasty poet Li Yi once wrote, "Behind jade walls and golden doors, a beauty sighs through endless days. The scent of spring may drift outside, but inside, time just slips away." And so we ask, was it worth it?